This will be the largest civil project in Montana history. And when it's in the ground and you drive by it, unless you're flying over it with an airplane or helicopter, you won't even know anything's there.
Gonna take a ride, a holiday, fall away. Damn, it feels good to drive all the way in every lane.
Hi, and welcome to episode 2 of the Montana Power Podcast. My name is Ryan Kissinger, and joining me on the phone are Max Smith and Dan Carlino, who's running for the Public Service Commission. Just introduced the interview we did actually a couple of months ago with Carl Borgquist, who's actually working to develop a water battery in the Gordon Butte. This would do a great deal in pushing us towards a more renewable future. We had a really interesting interview, and we also experienced some technical difficulties. Max was on the board, and Dan and I were actually calling in via Facebook Messenger along with Carl on the phone. And if you happen to be listening to this on like really high-end headphones, you might actually hear Dan drinking his coffee. And then at a certain point, I actually just dropped out of the call because I was on a 15-minute break from work. Anyways, that's the background. Do you guys want to pipe in?
Oh, yeah. I don't have a whole lot of commentary on the actual interview. Cue it up, baby. But so I won't talk about that. But I just wanted to give another quick plug. Take this time. You have the ability to you, dear listener, have the ability to pause the audio right now. Yeah, did you know that? You can click play, pause, skip ahead 15 seconds. All that is available to you. I'm encouraging you to hit pause right now.
Okay, just 1 second. I'm writing this down. Okay.
Good. Yeah. Step 1, pause. Step 2, dear listener, don't do this step for Dan Carlino, the PSC candidate. Do it for the interviewee, Carl, and the future of his project. Share the crap out of this, man. Share it with somebody you think that would be interested in this particular topic, or share it with somebody that believes that renewables are unfeasible and they make up a small percentage of the power generation in this country for a reason. Share it with somebody that you want to influence, and a Montana citizen at that, so maybe they could vote for Dan in the end. All right, that's my plug.
Awesome. Well said. And I just want to explain again, we're actually doing the Facebook Messenger setup once again. So our audio on Max and Dan's end isn't the best. We're still doing our COVID-19 quarantine. Max is, I assume, on his farm, and Dan's somewhere in Missoula, and I'm here in Hamilton, Montana. Dan, did you have anything to add before we start the interview?
No, it's been an interesting time campaigning during this pandemic. It's probably an election cycle that there's never been one like this before. And, this podcast is a really interesting way to give listeners at home the time to really dive deep into these issues. And I particularly really like Carl's project because this is a solution to battery storage to get us off of fossil fuels. This one hydro pump storage project literally has the same amount of storage as 2 of their natural gas plants that Northwestern Energy is proposing out of their 4 to double their portfolio. So Wow. This is a real solution on the table to get us to 100% renewable energy. So I'm super excited that we got Carl on here.
And Dan's not just entertaining this whole idea, this project by himself. He's sharing it with people that previously have no concept of it, and that's what the job of a leader, I think, is. So it's pretty impressive that this man Carl sat down with us and took the time out. I think at the end he actually mentions that he's bopping on to a meeting with the governor of Montana So we were honored to interview him and to share this with you, and hope that you pass it on.
Well said, Max. And I guess without further ado, we'll start the interview.
Carl Borgquist is joining us today. He's the founding partner of Absaroka Energy. He has a long-term experience in law, capital markets, finance, and renewable energy development. And he's a presenter, actually, and a thought leader on infrastructure development, grid innovation, and energy policy. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Public Administration from California State University, and also a law degree from the University of San Francisco. He's here today to talk about a really interesting proposal that he has before our monopoly utility in Montana, Northwestern Energy. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the proposal's out there for other energy companies in the region, right?
Yes, it is.
Great. And also on the call today are Daniel Carlino and Ryan Kissinger.
Yeah, thanks, Max. My name is Daniel Carlino. I've been coordinate the Sunrise Movement Hub in Missoula, and I've been working on stopping climate change the past few years, and I'm currently running for the Public Service Commission in District 4, up to Libby and down to Hamilton. And, you know, it's just great to have this. I've been really excited about this Gordon Butte project because it shows a good way to get a large amount of renewable energy storage with current technologies instead of having to wait for better batteries. So this is awesome. I'm glad that this is going on here.
Well, I'm honored to be here. I'm happy and there's one other person on the call though too, right?
Oh yeah. My name is Ryan Kissinger. I'm a medical illustrator originally from Vancouver, Canada, and my involvement is more as like a concerned citizen, and also I had the podcasting equipment, and I'm allowing these guys to use it. So, anyways,
all right,
that's my story. Yeah.
All right. Well, I will try to be entertaining and informative, and I am ready for your questions.
Well, let's get into it. My very limited understanding of the grid is that there are generation facilities scattered around our country. Gas-fired plants, hydroelectric plants, wind farms, and they're generating electricity using turbines and sending those electrons onto the grid, onto cables, that get transmitted across the state, crisscrossing around the countryside, and that sends power to people's homes, and they use appliances, and meters track usage. Can you tell us about your battery project and what advantages that it has for our energy grid?
Yes, I can. So listen, let me have you think of the grid like a set of pipes. And some of the pipes are big and some of the pipes are small, and those pipes end up, stopping at lights and heaters and dryers and electric ranges and, whatever else we're using those electrons to power our world with. And then there are power plants that are pushing electrons on. But if we think of it like water instead of electricity, I think it gets a little simpler to think about. The pressure of the electrons that are coming onto the grid and the negative pressure that's created when they're pulled off, that has to sort of stay in balance. And when we burn coal or gas, it was easier to turn that power generation on and have it hit a set point and manage it fairly easily. The problem with wind and solar is that it trips on and off very quickly. And somewhere the grid operator for the area that they're trying to manage has to move something to counterbalance the generation coming in and the generation coming off. And that occurs every 4 seconds. So Northwestern Energy, for example, does this every 4 seconds. They do it by moving up and down some of their generation plants, one gas plant in particular in Anaconda. This is pretty dramatic at some parts of the grid. In California right now, the grid operator is seeing 3,000 to 5,000 megawatt moves in less than 10 minutes. And to give you some perspective, that would be like a city of 5 million people suddenly turning everything on or turning everything off. And they have to counterbalance that with assets that they can turn on and off. If they don't do that, if they're not able to do that successfully, the danger is that the system starts tripping off. And to give you a sense of how sensitive the system is, in 2003, literally a tree branch fell into a substation in Ohio. And because of some issues in the grid at that moment, it ended up cascading outages into Toronto and New York City. And if you've ever seen there are pictures of New York City in 2003 at this event where it's black. There's no power going into the city. Lots of people lost their lives. It was a multi-billion-dollar event. And so FERC and NERC, which are federal agencies managing the grid, get very, very obviously sensitive about how utilities and balancing areas do this in order to try to avoid those kinds of problems. So renewable energy, great in the sense that it's very cheap and the fuel source is free. They're clean, but you got to have these large, fast-acting, flexible capacity batteries and plants available to shock absorb the generation tripping on and off very quickly. So in the world, batteries are relatively inexpensive. They're easy to deploy, but they tend to last only about 5 to 10 years, and then you have to replace them. So the benefit of pump storage is this is a 100-year asset. It never degrades. Just to give you some perspective, we calculated what it would cost using Tesla batteries to replicate what we're doing at Gordon Butte. And it would take about 1.6 billion of Tesla batteries to replicate the storage capacity of Gordon Butte. And of course, in 5 to 10 years, you'd have to completely replace that. The benefit of Gordon Butte is it never degrades. It doesn't really wear out. Our first major maintenance interval on Gordon Butte is estimated at year 27, when the turbines in the pumps and generators, the blades, essentially metal blades, would have to be replaced because over time they'll get pitted and sort of worn out. So there's a long-winded answer for that pretty simple question that you asked. Hopefully that's what you were angling for.
Definitely, yeah. Thanks for your discussion on the grid as a whole. Yeah. Okay.
Well, Dan wanted you to talk about the engineering behind the Gordon Butte project, what makes it and why it currently isn't being embraced by the current utility or by Northwestern Energy.
Yeah, so there's lots of pump storage that was put into the ground 30 or 40 or more years ago. And this equipment was relatively simplistic. It really only did what we would call a mode change twice a day. So at night, the equipment would be shut down. The plant would be dewatered. So you'd close the valves and take all the pressure out of the equipment. And then you'd reverse it to pump and push water to the upper reservoir. And then that would happen all night. And then in the morning, you would stop, dewater the machine, reverse it, and then generate through the day. And those simplistic plants were often put in a place to capture the energy from really large coal plants and in particular nuclear plants, which are both difficult to shut down. And so rather than waste the energy at night, this would give you an ability to store the energy and then bring it out during the day when people could use it. The world that we're walking, if you think about the explanation I gave about the grid, and that pump storage now is really about its primary job and task is to be that very capable asset that can move up and down very quickly to shock absorb variations in load and generation to keep the system healthy. The equipment has to be able to move very quickly, and the mode change of the old equipment would take 30 minutes to accomplish. To shut it down, dewater it, and switch it would take a very long time. The equipment set that we're putting into Gordon Butte, which has been used in Europe but not used in North America, is able to pump and generate at the same time. And what that does is it allows us in seconds to move from pumping to generating. And if you think about, wind tripping on and off, variations in the grid, that speed is very important. It's probably important to realize that the western half of the United States is really one electrical system called the Western Interconnect. And so everything that's happening in New Mexico and California and Washington and Arizona, all of that is affecting, that behavior affects everybody else because all of these pipes, which are the wires, are all connected. In California right now, there's so much solar in the system that at 3:00 in the afternoon, the California operator has to turn on between 15 and 20,000 megawatts of gas in order to make up the loss of solar that drops off when the sun falls away. So speed is essential, flexibility is essential, and the old equipment that you had to stop and dewater in order to switch is not as useful as this equipment that we're putting into Gordon Butte that can move in seconds. It's that equipment set, which is really it's not cold fusion. It's just a way that we piped and arranged the hydraulic connection between the power plant and the lower reservoir. My little company in Montana won a national competitive award with the Department of Energy and National Renewable Energy Labs to look at that equipment and look at its ability to help shock absorb and stabilize the grid of the future that we're walking into, where we've got these generation sources that kick on and off very quickly.
Okay, you talked a lot about the equipment set. Can you also talk about the engineering magic, kind of the proposed site at Gordon Butte?
Well, people ask us a lot about how we do site selection, and I would tell you we don't have some large AI based computer looking for sites. We really we try to apply some common sense. Gordon Butte is a very interesting and attractive site. One, because the elevation gain happens very quickly. So we gain 1,000 feet of elevation by this very steep attribute of Gordon Butte. And that allows us to put the upper and lower reservoir very close to one another. And thus the penstock, the buried hydraulic connection between the two reservoirs, which is estimated to be about 18 or 19 feet in diameter. So it's a very large tunnel. That's relatively short because that elevation gain happens very quickly. Gordon Butte is also on a very large private ranch, so it's a private landowner. It's also just a few miles from the Colstrip line, which is one of the largest transmission lines in the country and certainly a backbone to the Northwestern grid. It's also, from a marketing perspective, very interesting because when we connect into the Colstrip line at the back of the project, we enter the networks of the major Northwestern utilities. So that's Puget, Portland General, Pacific Core, Vista, and Northwestern. All of those utilities in the Northwest are looking at capacity deficits in the future. They're all trying to find ways to regulate and integrate renewable generation, which means they need this shock absorber capability. So that was very interesting from a marketing perspective. And then we're very close to a drainage out of the north end of the Crazies where we fill our closed system. Now, we only need a few days of filling it once a year to top off for evaporation. Our first fill takes 35 days to accomplish, and then again, we're just topping off, but the water was very close by. And we were able to work out an arrangement with the water users to take water during the spring runoff, so we weren't competing with people that were trying to irrigate. And all of that created this sort of magical cocktail that is Gordon Butte and the development that we've put together there.
Interesting. Are there any other magical cocktails around in our area that could be paired with this battery project? Have you been analyzing other sites, or?
Well, it's public record. We have permitted with FERC a site about 10 miles to the east of Gordon Butte. It's another volcanic geologic feature that's very much like the feature at Gordon Butte. It's just south of the town of Two Dot. We also have one permitted just east of Casper, Wyoming. And those are two very good sites, very clean sites. And we're starting the process of developing those, though most of our focus at this point is just trying to get Gordon Butte kind of finished and under construction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I felt weird about asking you because you haven't, the first one hasn't been completed yet, but at 400 megawatts, I was just curious if there were more projects coming online and could, people could be aware of.
Yeah,
so.
the Two Dot site is smaller. That one will probably be about 250 or 260 megawatts with 8 to 9 hours of storage. The one in Casper is 400 megawatts, 8 to 9 hours of storage. And we'll be deploying the relationships and work that we've already, accomplished with General Electric and the utilities and NREL and Department of Energy to put this very fast acting equipment in those facilities when we get into developing those sites. But again, at this point, we've been working for a long time on Gordon Butte. We're trying to get it finished and we want to get it under construction.
Okay. All right, Carl, what are the most jaw-dropping stats about your project?
Well, I think there's this one. I'll just rest on this. This will be the largest civil project in Montana history. And when it's in the ground and you drive by it, unless you're flying over it with an airplane or helicopter, you won't even know anything's there. The powerhouse is a football field and a half, dropped 200 feet in the ground. The penstock's 19 feet, call it in diameter. That's buried in the ground. By the time we're done, you won't see the upper reservoir. You won't see the lower reservoir. That $1 billion project will be buried in the ground and squirreled away. I tell everybody that helps us that I'm throwing a massive party before we set the equipment down on the floor of the powerhouse. So I'll be 200 feet down. So you guys might need to come to that.
Oh yeah.
I'll be there, man.
It's going to be a barn burner. After all these years, I'm cutting loose.
So Carl, projects like this seem like the best way to, just have reliable energy 100% of the time without fossil fuels. So have you had a chance to talk to the PSC or their staff about the Gordon Butte yet? And what has their response been to this project?
I've talked to them a lot. The thing that I talk about, really the two things that I focus on with the utilities and the commissions. The first thing is this is really the low cost alternative to providing this capacity. For the same price as what we're all paying for that gas plant in Anaconda, I can basically provide more than twice the capacity, and move very, very quickly without any need to burn gas or, have the sort of maintenance problems that have gone along with basically taking the jet engine and revving it up and down every 4 seconds. That is something I can do with Gordon Butte effortlessly. From a batteries perspective, again, let me take you back to the Tesla comparison. To create an equivalent Tesla power plant would be $1.6 billion instead of $1 billion. Right. And then if you're cycling it up and down, those batteries just wear out and you have to start over. So it's another $1.6 billion in 5, 6, 7, 10 years.
That's a lot of money.
The benefit of batteries is that they're easy to deploy. They're easier to deploy. I mean, it is a difficult proposition to do the engineering, permitting, studies, all of the things that we've had to do to get Gordon Butte ready to go in the ground. It's a lot of work, but it is the robust, reliable, predictable storage medium for the utilities. And that's when I talk to utilities and talk to commissions and commissioners, that's the thing I'm focused on, because, I can actually articulate and have had, by the way, I've had, third-party consultants and engineers and experts, basically, including the Department of Energy, analyze all of this for us. So it's not just, something I'm saying. It's supported with documentation and references. But, it's really something to be able to do something that's so robust and clean and support the integration of very cheap, very clean renewable power in a predictable way. I can't tell you how proud I am of my little team and what we're trying to do, getting this is a massive battery, 3,200 plus megawatt hours a day is what we can store. So it's huge.
Back to the PSC commissioners and the staff that you talked to at length, what have their responses been?
Well, I think, one thing in defense of everybody, let me just say, making a change like this to the grid is hard. People get used to doing business a particular way, and this is a whole different way of operating the grid. It's a whole different way of thinking about how to manage our transmission, and it's such a delicate instrument, the grid. We just don't realize how careful we have to be when we make a change. So that's, in defense of everybody, that's part of what's going on. And I think over time we've moved the needle slowly, but we seem to be moving it. And I'd like to think that very soon we will have essentially tenants for our building, utilities that will use this capacity, and that's sort of the last step, and we're trying to get through that right now and get those things put together so we can build the thing. But building a gas plant's easy.
Done.
You build the thing on a concrete pad and plug it in and start burning something. That's a lot easier than this, but this is the world that we're walking into, and I think people are starting to realize, even in Montana and Wyoming and places where there's been a lot of historical utilization of coal and gas, that this is the world we're walking into. And certainly by the way, we're obviously an exporter of energy. Our customers on the West Coast have all passed legislation basically mandating that those utilities get out of coal and get into renewables. And I often say to people, we used to build Studebakers. Nobody wants our Studebakers anymore. We need to learn how to build a Prius and just, buckle down and get that job done. And by the way, here's the benefit. It's cheaper.
Yeah.
Right. Which is this. And by the way, this is probably an important point. You wouldn't think Wall Street. You wouldn't think of them as a bunch of tree huggers. They're not. But they are experts at managing risk, and they see a lot of risk associated now with fossil fuel and coal, and they're just not investing in it. And if they're just not investing in it.
Well, we have
so you can't find any money. We can ride what we've got until they're worn out, but I don't think we're going to be doing. There's no money to do anything new because renewables are just too cheap. Nobody's going to spend more money to burn coal than putting, batteries and renewable generation together to create the alternative. It's just not going to happen. And so it's coming. This change is coming.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got a lot of questions to that effect. We really want to talk about the costs and risks associated with development of new gas and the 2019 procurement plan and that sort of thing. But real quick, while we're talking about the PSC and utilities, we went through Absorca Energy's project documents, and it's really clear that you've jumped through many hoops to get the ball moving and keep it moving. Going through water and land regulations and considerations of the nearby town of Martinsdale, and so after all those hoops, we kind of wanted to know is contracting with the utilities like in the Pacific Northwest and Montana, is that the biggest hurdle of all out of all that, or
the last hurdle? That's the last hurdle.
Yeah, okay.
That's the last thing. We're permit ready. We are engineered. We're ready to go. This thing is ready to go under construction.
So how do utilities weigh in at this point, and what role does the PSC have in whether Gordon Butte and projects like it get built?
Well, the PSC, as you guys know, rate bases activity by the utilities, and so the utilities need their blessing in order to, participate in these kinds of projects. We need a long-term PPA in order to attract the financing, the $1 billion financing we need to build the thing. So we need the utilities to work with us. We need the commissions to work with us. And really, honestly, I think the hardest part of, let's compare Gordon Butte to a battery. The hardest part is we're a big project. We don't fit very well into a 50 megawatt RFP for flexible capacity, let's say, right? We have to build at 400 megawatts. That's what we've designed. That's what we had licensed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We don't have the capability to scale that up or down. It is what it is. And so to get the utilities to get off of their RFP thinking and actually look at a project like this and sit down and put an arrangement and partnership together is just more complicated than it would be if you are putting a turbine in the ground or putting a solar panel up. It's just a bigger, more complicated beast than that. So that's a challenge for us. But the benefit is, you get an asset that is cheap and predictable and that you can count on. And again, for the utilities, that's an important attribute. The utilities that we're talking to are not enamored with batteries. Batteries are catching on fire. Despite the fact that they're cheap, they tend to wear out very quickly. They wear out sometimes without a predictable sort of view or from a planning perspective. And of course, if they just, once they wear out, you got to, you have to have it. So that has all been happening and has shifted over the last few years. I would have said 2 or 3 years ago that gas was our biggest competition for providing the regulation service that we're trying to meet. Then it became batteries, and now both gas and batteries, for various reasons, are struggling. You're going to see And the utilities are just getting more interested in pump storage and this new generation of pump storage in order to solve these integration and regulation problems.
Oh, it's really good to hear your optimism. Wow.
It's coming. I just have to, keep putting bricks in the wall.
Right.
Sometimes it feels a lot like, 2 bricks in, 1 brick out sort of thing. But, at this point, I'm on the job. I'm not going anywhere until I get to have that party at the bottom of the powerhouse.
Right, yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Everybody's stuck with me. I'm going to keep yammering at them until I get the job done.
Well, hopefully you'll still have your black hair by the end of this. What's your next question, Dan?
So like it looks like from the cost effectiveness to the reliability to the cleaner and so on and so forth, this is the right way to go is with hydro pump storage. But when we're looking at Northwestern Energy's 20-year procurement plan that they released, it just isn't looking good for renewable energy and no mention of hydro storage projects that they're going to follow through with. So I guess we're wondering what your biggest critiques of their procurement plan are, and why are they not jumping on this cost-effective, reliable hydro storage pump?
I can't tell you exactly why. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I can speculate, and I'll try to speculate in a way that's, it's because they're a utility that I want to work with. And in many ways, this project is perfect for them, perfect for their system.
Right.
But they're used to, and for a long time, they've solved their needs with gas. And a little ways back, maybe 5 minutes back, one of you asked a question about the problem that I see with developing gas, or their plan. And by the way, we filed extensive comments. If you haven't seen those, they're a public record. I'll be happy to email them to you. Okay. We've spread them around to everybody. And you will find us trying to be gracious, agreeing with the stuff we can agree with, politely disagreeing with things we disagree with. But one of the problems we point out with gas development, besides the cost and the risk of the environmental issue that Wall Street's paying attention to, and any gas plant you're going to put in the ground is going to cost you a lot because the money's going to cost you a lot, and it's unclear what that extra uplift will be to manage that risk on the financing side. But the other thing is you got to build more pipelines. And any linear facility development, whether it's electrical wires or gas pipelines, is just becoming really, really difficult and risky to accomplish. So, our entire project, including the transmission of the connection back to the Colstrip line, is all managed under the FERC process. We're done. We're ready to connect to the grid. All of that work is finished. We don't have to go for a separate process to connect the pump storage to the grid. We've already accomplished all that. So
right. So it sounds like there's like some unanalyzed costs for the natural gas in their plan. Do you have any other comments on that?
It's just that, again, and again, I'll be happy to send these to you.
Right.
I'll try to keep it at a high level here, because we have outside experts that have analyzed this and put all of that documentation into our comments. But again, if you think about a gas plant, they're regulating every 4 seconds with a gas plant, let's say, or coal plant. Basically, that if the gas plant's 100 megawatts, in order to regulate with that, they have to turn the gas plant on and hit what's called a minimum set point. So just to have it available, it has to sit there at idle burning gas. And that really gives them the capability to regulate between the minimum set point and the 100 megawatt maximum. So Gordon Butte's different than that, because we can sit at 0 and not do anything, and we can move down and store energy. We can move up to produce energy. And so just from a capacity standpoint, just from the ability to move, we can move twice as far as they can, not even counting for the minimum set point, if that makes any sense. So for the same price as what we're paying for a megawatt of capacity in that gas plant, we really can create 2 megawatts of capacity in the Gordon Butte project. Now, we've never thought about storage that way, because we're dealing with a world that even 3 years ago, we didn't know, we didn't foresee. I mean, it's moving so quickly and so fast. And if I had any luck in this, it was the naivete of one of my clients got me involved in wind development. And I'll be honest with you, my reaction was, when the client asked me to get involved, my reaction was, I don't know how the lights go on. Are you sure you want me to do this? But there was that naivete was really, I think, a benefit to me, because I didn't understand anything about the grid. And so I had to start from scratch. And when I saw how quickly wind would trip on and off, I realized that at some point we were going to need this really robust storage to be a part of this. And of course, I didn't have to go far from a precedent point of view, thinking like a lawyer. I just went to Europe and started paying attention to what they were doing as they were increasing their renewable penetration and, finding ways to manage it. So, so the world is moving quickly. I've just got lucky and had an instinct that this was going to be important, and started working on it 8 years ago. And here we are, sort of just at the right place at the right time with this massive battery. But it's going to be, we're going to need this for the world we're walking into. We're not going to pay more money to burn coal and gas. I think those days are moving. We're moving away from that quickly. Northwestern hasn't yet, but I know they're thinking about it, and I know they're trying to figure out what to do. And again, I want to be graceful and gentle, because I want them to move towards this project and see the benefits and opportunities for the state in moving in this direction. Again, we're an net energy exporter, and our customers want clean electrons. So that's what we need to produce.
Well, we want to be very sensitive to the idea that that you're talking about these issues in relation to Northwestern Energy, and you have you have meetings with them all the time, I'm sure, and so just to kind of temper this conversation a little bit, we wanted to ask you about what impact this would have for integration of renewables for a company like Northwestern Energy. Renewables, we hear all the time, like wind farms are producing some of the cheapest energy available right now, but can you walk us through what this does for allowing more of those renewables to actually be used, so that the wind that's blowing is actually powering homes? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let me take you back to the first question.
Okay.
And just to make things more dramatic, let's go to California, because we're connected to that grid. It's a relevant data point, right? And California's ahead of us. They're interconnecting a lot more, in particular solar, into their system. They're shutting down nuclear. They're shutting down their big coal plants. And the grid operator is seeing these 3,000 to 5,000 megawatt swings. Now that is just scary from an operation standpoint, right? Let me give you I'll give you a sort of metaphor story that a grid operator from California that I was on a panel with at Hydrovision tells the story to his teenage son this way. He says, before renewables, as the operator, I would be driving at highway speed down a highway that was straight. And every 4 seconds, I'd be able to open my eyes and make a course correction on that highway. But basically, the highway was straight. So I wasn't going to be too far off every 4 seconds, right? Now, with renewables taking over from thermal generation and nuclear, I'm opening my eyes every 4 seconds to make an adjustment, but the highway is starting to curve and curve very dramatically. And that is, for an operator, is a very scary thing because they have to keep that system in balance for fear that they will trip it off and then this cascading blackout thing would happen. Mm-hmm. So again, renewables, clean, free fuel. But the penalty for that, the payment is that they trip on and off. And we have to have something that you can shock absorb that with. And that's what we're doing. We're just the shock absorber. We're not really producing electricity as much as making sure that the electricity that's coming into the system is reliable and manageable so that, we can keep the grid and the lights on. That's what we're doing. That's what a battery does.
And do you think that it would be pretty easy for a company like Northwestern Energy to justify this sort of investment to their investors and shareholders? Do you talked a little bit about Wall Street and their acceptance of the project and the technology, and I'm just curious.
I do.
Yeah. Okay.
I do. I think that there is. Wall Street is sort of the canary in the coal mine because they're assessing risk. And I think that this is the world that we're moving into. And, whether it takes a day or a year or whatever it takes, this is the direction that we're headed into.
Mm-hmm. Was there any technical complaints?
But by the way, let me just say this. By the way, Northwestern is a publicly traded company. And I know they pay attention to legislators and consumers and interested stakeholders. So anybody that's interested in, supporting what we're trying to do, please get involved, right? Letters to the commission, talk to your legislators, talk to Northwestern. These are big changes, and that would help, I think, provide some cover and support and justification for them to move in the direction we'd like them to move in.
You're here. And elect the right people, too. Vote for the right people.
Yeah.
Vote for people that are actually discussing batteries, I think, is a good step as a citizen, too, to, get out the way.
I have to say, being a member of the Public Service Commission is an incredibly technical and surprisingly important job in state. Mm-hmm. Hugely important. This evolution it's a massive change in our economic capability and outlook and just what we're going to be able to do as the state of Montana. By the way, the governor's walking into our office in 10 minutes. I'm going to have to get off the phone, and this is a continued message that I have laid at his doorstep, which is it's hugely important that we skate to where the puck is going, not where it's been. The puck is moving, and we got to skate towards it. We got to Wayne Gretzky this thing. We can't be caught flat-footed, right?
Yeah. We've got one more question. Do you want to ask that last one, Dan?
Yeah. So we're curious if you've thought about how batteries and a smart grid could work together in this effort to make sure that we can get 100% renewable energy 100% of the time. And how do you imagine the grid of the future looking?
Well, when you say smart grid, here's what I think about. we've got to have things that we can turn on and off very quickly. And let me just separate. Let me separate the smart grid from a microgrid. So a microgrid, I would say, is a isolated system that's, may or may not even be connected to the grid, but it's kind of trying to do its own thing. And I think those will be a little bit of the world we're walking into, but that's very expensive. And we have put so much money and effort into the grid that for most consumers, they can't afford to put solar panels on their roof or put a battery in their garage.
Right. I guess when I'm saying smart grid, I'm referring to like everybody having a meter at their house that reports back to the centralized system to where we can tell who's using what energy at what time of the day, and then how to best integrate that with this hydro storage project. Have you seen that done in the past?
People have different ways of articulating what a smart grid is. When I think of a smart grid, I think of us having the ability for grid operators to control more of the generation and load, because this generation and load profile is moving around so much. And so, as an example, if the grid operator can decide when your dishwasher is going to run, to try to make it run at a time when it's convenient. Think about this. You certainly don't want things turning on from 3 to 7 o'clock in the world that we're walking into, because that is a crucial time where we don't have enough energy to make up for the solar drop-off. So it's time shifting our utilization of energy instead of just assuming we're just going to be able to turn things on whenever we want. That's what the smart grid means to me. And that's that's going to be a difficult change for a home-based consumer to get in the habit of saying, I can only run the dryer from 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning, right? And the utility operator is going to decide when I get to turn my dryer on and off. We haven't quite gotten there yet. But we are looking at Absaroka Energy for resources on the demand side that we can offer to the utilities to turn on and off, to sort of lighten and shift the load. I think that's low-hanging fruit for this additional renewable penetration and trying to manage the issues that come along with that, in addition to having a battery.
Interesting.
That makes sense?
It does, yeah. And we'll have to have you on for another interview, maybe just to talk about that.
Sure. I can talk about this stuff, I've learned a lot. I've gotten way past the first pass, which was, I don't know how the lights go on. I've had to catch up quickly.
Well, you've surpassed us all now. Well done. Well, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it, and we'll let you jump on with that other call for the day.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks for listening to my little spiel. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Carl. All right, we'll talk to you in the future.
All right. Okay. Have a good day. Thank you.